Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is sort of the redheaded stepchild of the Donkey Kong Country series. It's not that people really dislike this game, no. I don't see any DKC fans going, "Grr, this game ruined the franchise!" Quite the opposite, I've seen people who say this is their favorite of the SNES trilogy. But I've also seen people who say this game is disappointing. It doesn't have an outstanding love for it, like DKC 2 or heck, even DKC 1 did. It just gets swept up as a bizarre entry that most people can agree is a game that exists. Why is that? Well, I think it boils down to two things. First is its release window. It released November 18th, 1996. Why is that date important? Well, the N64 released September 29th, 1996. 1 month before it, Donkey Kong Country 1 was hailed as a technical marvel, an accomplishment. It was a game with 3D graphics. Of course, that was a lie. They were 3D modeled images, yes, but they were flattened down to a traditional 2D sprite sheet. And now he had an actual 3D Mario game with actual polygons on the market. Donkey Kong Country, by comparison at this time, just felt old and antiquated. The graphical style that was amazing us years ago just feels like a cheap gimmick now. But I mean, who cares if it's not blowing us away with its graphics or presentation? If the game can stand on its own as a true step forward for the franchise, then it can easily cultivate its own fandom, right? Well, this is the second problem. I said DKC 1 felt like a classic Warner Brothers or Disney cartoon. I said DKC 2 felt like a Tim Burton or Henry Selick film. DKC 3, meanwhile, feels like a Saturday morning cartoon. And not like Avatar: The Last Airbender Saturday morning cartoon, I mean the Super Mario Bros. Super Show Saturday morning cartoon. Enemies are goofy and much more cartoony. The NPCs you encounter are all silly bears. Do you know what the plot of this game is? King K. Rool has gotten fed up with those Kongs foiling his plans, so he takes his wife's pots and pans, dresses up like Frankenstein, builds a killer robot out of them, kidnaps Donkey and Diddy, and hooks him up to this killer robot like he's generic brand Dr. Robotnik. And if you think I'm joking about the taking his wife's pots and pans thing, I'm not. He literally says to our protagonist, "I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you meddling kids." Like he's a Scooby-Doo villain or something. This is how DKC 2 ends. Our heroes looking out over the horizon as Kremling Isle sinks into the ocean. Our villain laughing maniacally as he plots his inevitable vengeance. And this is how DKC 3 ends. He may as well be going, "I'll get you next time, Kongs! Next time!" under that eggshell. The entire game just has this silly, childish tone to it that's a major departure from the atmosphere of the first or second games. And I think that just rubbed people the wrong way at the time. Kids who grew up with DKC 1 and 2, well, they were getting older now. They were no longer 7 or 8. They were 12 and 13. They wanted mature games, for mature people, such as themselves. And this game just felt silly in comparison to what came before. Not to mention, really? You just did the plot of DKC 2 again, except this time both Donkey and Diddy get kidnapped. This not only makes it old hat and redundant, it also unfortunately makes it so that Donkey Kong is only playable in one of the games in the series named after him. Like, imagine if the Mario games went Mario World, Luigi's Mansion, and then Princess Peach Showtime. That's what it feels like. But with that said, if you'll recall my first video I did on this series, I said that I liked this game better than the first one. Now, why is that? Well, simple really. Mechanically, I think this game is great. In fact, if I were to just judge these games based on how fun they are to play, I would dare say 3 might be my favorite. All the levels in this game are fun and incredibly smooth to play. It's an experience you can glide through from start to finish. It's also one of the most ambitious games on the SNES. Rare knew the hardware better than anyone else, and were adamant to squeeze as much fidelity out of the graphics of this game as they could. In fact, I'll say it, I think this game looks better than Mario 64. Proving that artistry beats innovation 90% of the time. So while the presentation and writing may be a step down from the first 2 entries, the gameplay remains top-notch and worth observing. So I'm gonna go back over this game. Just like my ranking of DKC 1 and 2, I'll be ranking every level of this game from worst to best. And yeah, you should probably watch my first 2 videos before watching this one, it's a series after all. So are you ready? It's on! It's on like... Hold on, getting a call. Huh? Uh-huh. Okay. What? What? Are you freaking serious? But... Okay. It's been brought to my attention that in my first video, I may have made a bit of an oversight. And I'd like to take this time to correct that. Donkey Kong Country 1's Game Boy Advance port doesn't really add any new content or levels like the ports of DKC 2 or 3, but it does change around the boss fights and give them new mechanics. So just to make sure, I played through DKC 1 GBA just to make sure the bosses actually improved enough to leave the space I gave them in my initial ranking. And after doing so, I've come to the conclusion of no. They're still mostly pretty bad and I still rank them in the same order. I like Queen Bee's new fight a bit more, but she was already my favorite of the non-K rule fights in the game, so yeah. However, there is another thing I overlooked. The Game Boy Color version of DKC 1. Yes, this game got a port to the Game Boy Color of all things. And it has a wholly unique level. And guys, I'ma be real with you, I like Donkey Kong Country. It's a good game, but this is the worst version of it bar none. Not only does it look and sound worse than the original, it's just plain a worse version of the original. The hit detection is worse, the controls are more sluggish, I swear there's an input delay. And the game practically broke on me several times and killed me for no reason. This version is awful and has no reason to exist when the Switch port of the original exists. Hell, I'd say play the GBA port over this. But it has a new level, and that level is a boring-ass cave level with mini neckies that spit coconuts at you. Of course it is! God, I fucking hate this version of the game so much. So much. This level gets to be the dishonorable 36th place of the original list. Yes, worse than Torchlight Trouble, just for the fact it's only on the Game Boy Color version. Worst version, worst level, that's all there is to it. Maybe it'd rank higher if it was on the SNES, but it's not. Now can we finally move on to the good game, please? Thank you. Fun is in the challenge, Simon. So this ranking might be a bit of a cheat on my part, but I don't care. The lowest rank on this list is a tie for every secret level in the game. Basically, DKC 3 has a much more involved overworld. You get a boat and can explore different parts of the map on water. That's really neat, but effectively all this means is that you can decide to either do Cotton Top Cove or Mechanos first after you get the hovercraft. Yippee! Like, I understand having an entry world to tutorial new players and an end world to have a proper climax, but you couldn't, I don't know, give us some more flexibility in what levels we do beyond that? Imagine how much more cool this game would be if it was just a bit more open-ended. But this overworld does give us another benefit, secret worlds. By doing missions for these bear NPCs or exploring the map, you can find these hidden levels. Oh wow, so I get to play an entire new level with a crazy new mechanic? That's so... Oh. Yeah, it's Simon. They're all Simon. All of them. Every single hidden world in this game is just the same basic-ass mini-game. Watch the colors and then hit the buttons in the same order. They're all like this and they all randomize every time you go in and play. I can't even rank them because their difficulties depend on how many of them you've beaten and not where they are in the game either. The reason I'm ranking them and not, I don't know, Swanky's target thing is because they are necessary to get the true ending of the game at 103%. And also, once you realize every secret level in this game is just this, it really takes the wind out of your sails. I would have gladly sacrificed all of Krematoa and put all of its levels as hidden levels in the other worlds. But I guess we can't reward players for being inquisitive too much. So yeah, these go here.
Look at him and tell me there's a god!
DKC 3 has a GBA port that added a new world and with it a few new levels. I'll be talking about those levels for this video, obviously, but there's one other baffling change that they made. They moved the boss from Razor's Ridge to its new world, Pacifica, and for Razor's Ridge they made an entirely new boss. And it's... God, what the hell? What is this thing? No, seriously, what is it? It's called Croctopus, but it looks more like a slime crab thing. I don't know. It's like somebody on the development staff said, "Hey Jerry, we need you to make a boss with this new port." And then he played Spore for 3 minutes and they were like, "Okay, what do you got for us?" This! Its tentacle claws reach out at you and you need to have it grab these Banjo-Kazooie bombs. So it hurts itself? Keep in mind for this thing's final run of attacks, it just sends out 2 of its tentacles in random directions and the bombs also land and detonate too quickly to direct the tentacles at them safely. Meaning the entire last leg of this fight is just an endurance test to avoid these attacks. Its design sucks and the fight itself is just annoying.
Who you gonna call?
Barrel!
So I made it no secret in my ranking of DKC 1's levels that I think the caves and mines levels in that game were a bit overdone. But I will say one positive thing about them. There was legitimately a sense of fear and trepidation as I went through them. They weren't much to look at, but the atmosphere of them was on point. They look great for what they were. Creepy Caverns doesn't. Creepy Caverns feels like an idea that was scrapped from DKC 2 that got re-implemented into this game and attached to DKC 3's cave level aesthetic, which just lacks any of 1's ambience. Like, ghost barrels? Really? In 2, it made sense for the more supernatural elements to be there. Kremling Isle was clearly all sorts of haunted. Meanwhile, 3 is much more focused on mad science and technology, so these ghost barrels, I mean, I can see how they'd work. But here? Now? At the dead end of the game and in the last world? Feels like a strange thing to introduce, and it makes the level feel rushed in its design. They're either spinning barrels with an extra step, or they're a hazard you're meant to avoid. Kind of a boring idea for this late in the game, really.
Storms are brewing.
Stormy Seas feels like the creators of the GBA version of DKC3 had a cool idea for the background, and that's it. Outside the background, it's just a stilt level and there's nothing much else to it. There's no new enemies and not much else in the way of new mechanics, so it just feels like a level. Like they couldn't even raise and lower the water levels like a high and low tide kind of thing. I dare say the background itself is a cool enough idea for this level to be justified, but on the GBA it just looks... bleh. Tidal Trouble is kind of like Stormy Seas, just without the cool background. But it's also much earlier in the game and it's your second stilt level, so I'm much more charitable to it. It's inoffensive, but doesn't really introduce much to the game itself, save for one thing. I haven't mentioned Kiddy Kong in this review, because honestly I think he's a bit overhated. Like, yeah, he's a dumb baby, but you don't hear him talk or anything, so it's like, whatever, he's a dumb baby. I appreciate the game returning to the classic big guy, small guy dynamic of the first game. I think mechanically Kiddy is fine. But he has a mechanic that Dixie doesn't. See, Kiddy can skip on water. Roll into it and press A right before you dive in and you'll jump like so. It's how you reach this bonus barrel. Only, how the hell was anyone supposed to figure that out without a guide? No, really, tell me how people were meant to figure this out. Because I sure as hell didn't. I didn't get 103% in this game until I was in my teens. Granted, I was just bad at video games as a child, but still. With the game's overall emphasis on water levels, I assumed this was meant to be like Kiddy's big ability that would make him as useful as Dixie, and then they realized it was dumb and abandoned it after 2 levels.
I can't pronounce Baccaroda.
Baz's Blockade goes here, and I think it's time I really explain my dislike of swimming levels versus, say, squawk-centric levels. After all, aren't they the same? You press A to ascend, and you go up and down and try to avoid things in a big environment. Aren't these two things effectively the same? See, it took me a while to really figure out what I dislike about swimming levels, but I think I finally found a way to put it into words. Swimming levels are boring. While they do break up the pace of the game somewhat, they just replace them with the game of avoiding enemies. Since there's no threat of falling to your death in water, they need to just litter the level with enemies you need to avoid. And while that can be entertaining at first, it quickly becomes monotonous at best and aggravating at worst as enemy patterns start to blindside you. Endguard and Squawks make it better because they have attack options, and thus you have more ways of interacting with the world than obstacles than press A to avoid fish. With Endguard, I need to position myself for a proper charge attack, same with Squawks and his projectiles. There's a back and forth there. Without that extra element, swimming just becomes tedious. I get bored, and when I get bored, I get frustrated, and when I get frustrated, I try to end the level more quickly. Which just causes me to make sloppier mistakes as I try to speed my way through it. So yeah, that's my issue. And Baz's Blockade is not a particularly interesting take on the water theme. It's just a bunch of barracudas. Yippee. Look, we got more water levels to talk about, okay?
Squirtle?
Squirt's Showdown is probably the worst boss fight in the original game. In both the GBA and SNES versions, he's way too easy and predictable. You turn to Ellie for this fight and use her water squirting ability to blind this thing? Whatever it is. No, really, I have no clue what I'm even fighting here. It spits a long spout of water out at you. It doesn't damage you either, it just knocks you off. That's not a bad idea, but it does make this boss fight feast or famine. Either your platforming is on point and you just curb stomp him, or you're not quite used to it either and just get knocked off. Though it's probably the former. The only threat this boss poses is that you get greedy and wind up falling off while trying to hit both of his eyes in one pause in his attack. It's a pretty boring and strange fight, all things considered.
I say, Phineas, great day to be doing squat thrusts and lifting our huge triangular iron weights.
Tyrant Twin Tussle is a nothing level, especially for Krematoa. It's one gimmick, if you want to call it that, are these Kremlings, nothing clout. They're good designs, I think they're sufficiently goofy looking, but avoiding them is kind of a pain in the butt. They don't move in predictable patterns, and they either jump or charge depending on where they are. This level has Squitter though, so it's not that low, but it's also a boring cave level in DKC3, so yeah.
When she was pulled from her barrel below the falls, she declared, "Nobody ought to ever do that again."
Barrel drop bounce is probably the epitome of the problem I have with the waterfall levels. See, all these levels have a vertical design, which by itself isn't the problem. The real problem is that when you fall in these levels, you usually don't die. Instead, you fall down to a lower level, and if this happens after you've gotten the star barrel, well shit, just kill me now. Lives are easy enough to get in this game, and I would rather die and go back to the midpoint of this level than restart from a lower portion. Plus, I find this level just boring conceptually. Like, cool, barrels over waterfalls like that old Daredevil thing about Niagara Falls. But all it results in is these descending platforms. It's kind of a boring gimmick for a level, and this being the last of the falls levels doesn't really help it.
Home to Skid Row.
What I tend to like most about levels in video games is how much they can wow me. And if there was a level in DKC3 that didn't wow me, it would be SKS Row. The Skid themselves are funny enemies. I like how they look like they're 2 seconds away from falling flat on their faces. But in all other respects, this is a boring snow level in the first world, and highlights a sort of problem with DKC3. DKC1 had a fair number of level themes. It didn't distribute them all that well, but it still did them well enough. DKC2 had a whole slew of new level themes. The only ones that really copied from 1 were Forest and Jungle, and Forest case, they gave it a haunted edge. Meanwhile in 3, we have Jungle again, we have Caves again, we have Forests again, we even have Factories again. And we got snow-covered mountains. Again. Yeah, 3 feels like a redo of DKC1 in a lot of respects level theme-wise, and I wind up being drawn to 1's atmosphere a lot more. So any level that's relying on atmosphere while offering me an inferior version of it kinda suffers because of that.
I can power a small city with my whining.
Bombing Barrel Brawl is a forest level that highlights an issue I have with Ellie the Elephant. See, Ellie in her initial reveal was just worse Ramby. She can pick up barrels and pull them to her, but like, so can the Kongs. But then this level gives her a new ability, a ranged projectile where she can suck up water and shoot it from her trunk. That's a neat idea, I guess. But like, why didn't you introduce it in her first level? Maybe have a bonus barrel centered around that? Use it in other levels with her? But no, just don't. It's just weird is all? Otherwise this level is fine, but kinda annoying. You need to use these barrels to avoid Nibla, who's basically this game's Snapjaw. I guess what bugs me most about this level is that it turns you into Ellie, but I'm not sure why. Like, you could have easily not been her for this entire level and it still would have worked. I don't think it's a particularly good showcase of her abilities.
Yep, there's your answer, Fishbulb.
Floodlight Fish is a water level with a light mechanic. Already not looking so good, but this one's just sort of fine. You turn to Endguard for it and you hit these light fish. But the level itself doesn't really get dark enough that you can't see your surroundings easily enough. The GBA version really highlighted my issue with the water levels though. Endguard makes things a bit more engaging, but not that much. I still mostly found myself bored, and trying to get through this level quickly just made me play worse. Especially with this level's vertical design and enemy placement. Making me want to finish your level more quickly isn't a good sign. Dingi Drainpipe is the first level of Pacifica from the GBA version. It kinda boggles my mind that there was only one other water tube level in the original version, and well, we'll get to it. But yeah, this level, it's a neat idea, and I like the thought of swimming through basically a giant plumbing station. The only thing about it I don't like is this one section where the water lowers and the lurchins come down and can easily hit you. Like, what the hell? I guess they're tied to the water level so they need to move with it, but like, how the hell am I supposed to predict that? Whatever, it's still just a water theme level, so it goes here.
Hey Ma, guess where I am? Yeah, can you hear it? Flying through the air. I don't know what he shot at. I guess I'll just have to find out when I land.
Crisscross Cliffs is a neat level for Krematoa. See, how this level works is that it fires steel barrels from below. You jump up on them and they propel you upward. Only sometimes you'll run into these red buzzes who need to be dealt with. You turn them into TNT barrels and that kills the buzz. That's a cool idea. The barrels can be both your way up and also a potential hazard. But any part of the level in which you can get above the red buzz, yeah, the barrels just move through it anyway. Meaning several times you don't actually need to turn them into TNT barrels. Their spawn point is at the bottom of the screen. As long as the buzz isn't there, they can move up. Other than that, it's a neat level gimmick, but it's a bit annoying to ascend this way. I don't know why, but in the GBA version, even the steel barrels act as a projectile and can damage you. I don't know if it's the same in the SNES version, but I swear it never happened to me there.
Oh, it's you.
Loi Labyrinth starts out with a lot of promise. It's a level in which, as the name implies, you have low gravity, so you can jump higher and move around and descend more slowly. It's a really fun mechanic to be able to use, and there's a lot to enjoy about it. I don't see how they could mess it up. I mean, I guess if they made you use Squawks. That would be baffling because he can fly, so the low gravity would be pointless then. Heck, if anything, the game would just become a swimming level at that point. But at least I'd have a projectile, so it wouldn't be so bad. Oh. You. Yeah, this level has Quawks in it. Now yes, he is better than he was in DKC2, but not by much. He can fly now, actually, and he can also lift barrels, which need I remind you the Kongs can also do. But he can fly while doing it, which again, we're in low gravity, so jumping higher with barrels was already a thing, and... Look, Quawks being here just doesn't make sense. You already had a perfectly fine level gimmick and you ruined it by using literally the worst animal buddy to use here. Squawks would have been almost as bad, except again, he has a projectile. And you want to know the crazy thing? Squawks shows up in another bonus room. As if once more this motherfucker realizes he can't actually handle this, so he has to call in his more successful brother to do it for him. Again! I hate Quawks so goddamn much. Surf's Up is the third Tobogan level in the GBA version of the game. It's exclusive to that version, and I personally think it's kind of a weird nothing of a level. Like, it's using the same mechanic and theme as an earlier level, but there isn't any additional aspect that makes it interesting. DKC2 was able to give us 3 card levels that each had a unique gimmick to them. Here, meanwhile, it just feels like more of the same, which is just disappointing for supposedly new content.
According to all known laws of aviation, there is no way that a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground.
Riverside Races is a level with a lot going on. For one thing, there's a swarm of tiny buzzes chasing you. For another, there's a timer in the bottom. You need to get below Brash's time in order for him to get mad and unlock a Simon level. There's 2 bonus rooms and a Creme coin, and you need to use Kitty's water skipping ability for one, and an invincibility barrel for another, and yeah, see the deal here? It's a neat speedrun, I guess, but anyone playing this game casually will more than likely have to replay this level to get everything. That's not so bad, but I do think this level has way too much going on. Like, the Buzz Swarm already incentivizes you to run fast through it. I don't see why they need to throw in this gimmick of the world's bear. Fine level, but I think the Swarm or the Timer could have been used in another level for better effect. Belis Barn is the first boss in the game, and he's okay. Pretty easy unless you're bad with aiming your bug throws. He can't even really harm you, just push you to the end if you fail to throw bugs into his mouth in time. Once again, the big problem with this boss is that it's kinda feast or famine. I knew what to do quickly when I fought this boss, because I saw Dixie do it in a commercial for the game. But if you're unfamiliar with the game, I could see a legitimate issue that you don't quite know what to do. You might be thinking some other mechanic will show itself, or that you can't pick up these bugs, then suddenly, oh shit, I have barely any room left. Even if you do realize what to do, you have so little floor left that you basically can't jump on the barrel and bug without killing it. At which point, you're already screwed. In other words, this boss fight becomes harder the longer you wait around and easier the better you fight it. But it's still the first boss, so I guess that's okay. I do wonder what he is though, some kinda robot? Monster? But he can burp, so yeah, I don't know.
It's on the rockets! Stop! Wait! It's too late, DK! It's gonna blow!
Rocket Barrel Ride is the first real level of the waterfalls, and as such its biggest sin is mostly being forgettable. The rocket barrels themselves are a cool but simple idea, but my general complaint about the falls level still applies to this level, and I feel I should mention something else. See, DKC3 does a lot of unique things with perspective. Characters and attacks coming in from the background to the foreground, which would have been impressive if not for, again, Mario 64 being right there at the time. And sadly, playing with perspective on a 2D console can be a bit finicky. Basically, you can go behind or in front of the waterfall. And things behind the waterfall are on their own plane. So sometimes you need to get behind a waterfall and jump down. And when I say sometimes, I mean never. Yeah, there's never any real good reason to do this. At most, you get a bear coin. So in general, while this is a neat idea, its execution is somewhat flawed.
RPG! RPG!
Blazing Bazookas is probably my least favorite of the factory levels. That by no means is a bad thing though, because I feel like the factory levels of DKC3 are the inverse of my feelings on DKC1's cave levels. While I mostly found DKC1's factory levels banal and uninteresting, and strangely clean for buildings on an uninhabited jungle island, DKC3's factories are dark and oppressive. There's something moody and bleak about the atmosphere, it's almost horror-like. You really do get the impression that something dark and sinister is happening in the background. If DKC3 leaned more into its mad science theme, I think people would have a much higher opinion of this game. Other than that, yeah, bazookas are just techno cannons and they have the same mechanic. Squirtle is here too, and I find his inclusion a bit odd. He barely gets to do anything. He's also strangely common in the factory levels, which we'll talk about later. But it's just weird he's not on levels that would fit him more. Speaking of...
I don't suppose I could convince you to come up here and fight like a spider.
Springing spiders I find baffling. You have Squawks as the animal buddy in this level and not Squitter? Come on, it's a level about spiders! Whatever, the level itself is just inoffensive. Although the concept itself is pretty simple. You jump on these spiders with boards on their backs, and they jump for you. I like how this level comes before the boss of this world, whom we will be getting to eventually. Yeah, not much else to say about this one. It's fine, but also nothing special.
No, boys, stop! It's too low! Your backbone can't take it!
Putting the first level of this game, Lakeside Limbo, solo on this list might seem like a strange thing to do. But my justification is that I think this level did a lot of damage to the reputation of DKC3 in the minds of a lot of people playing it. It's not a bad level mechanically, but the music has this big brassy tuba sound that, well, it sounds goofy. On top of that is the bright and colorful art style, and I think most fans of DKC 1 and 2 were immediately turned off by this game's tone. This level also introduces us to Ellie, who I think also made a bad first impression. See, DKC 1's and 2's first levels had Rambi, and Ellie, as I said before, is just worse Rambi. Rambi can charge and plow through enemies while Ellie can't. She can only jump on them, which the Kongs can already do. It's not until much later that I think we get an idea of what Ellie can do, and I think that sort of ruined people's idea of her. You only get one chance to make a first impression, and this level sadly kinda bungled it.
Just cram a little oompa down your pants and you'll be up that rope in no time.
Cliffside Blast is a Pacifica level that feels like a missed opportunity. See, if you just read the level title and look at the first half, you'd think it's like Bramble Blast, but in the cliff theme. That's a neat idea, and I think it fits the world theme better than the Bramble theme does. There's a lot you can do with such an idea, and then... oh, it's just another rope climbing level. Which is every cliff level. Yay. Yeah, this level kinda loses its juice halfway through, and turns into just another nondescript cliff level. So I'm putting it here.
Get back, you eight-legged freaks!
Arch's Ambush is a boss fight against a giant spider. Sadly, the game doesn't have an arachnophobia option, so I don't know what this means for its accessibility. Can we replace this thing with like a giant bear or something? Although I guess it's pretty cartoony for a spider, so maybe it's okay. Anyway, it's a pretty alright boss. I like how if you know what you're doing, you can use it to get the barrels faster, but otherwise it's a mostly cool design that's fairly easy to beat if you know what you're doing.
'Cause 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Buzzard Barrage is a cave level, with quacks. Why is this not at the bottom of the list? Look, I hate quacks. We've been over this, and I think the cave levels of DKC3 are especially boring. But, I have to give this level props. It tries. It tries so hard to make this version of quacks seem usable. The level's centered around using barrels that quacks can pick up to kill buzzes with. It's kind of a puzzle platformer here almost, and they don't even bring in squawks for a bonus room or anything. However, and you're not going to believe this, these copter enemies kill quacks easily, but the Kongs can just jump on their heads. So basically, Quacks is still intentionally nerfed outside of his ability to fly. He literally brings nothing else to the table. So congrats, Quacks. At your very best, you can't get over the halfway mark. 40% is your limit.
But my mom says I'm cool.
Next.
It's still moving so much. Oh, it's moving a lot.
Barbs Barrier is fine for an underwater boss. Mostly up by the fact you turn to Endguard for it. Barbos himself is an interesting enemy, and I like his design. You need to jab these lurchins and the ones that are protecting him, then you need to stab his core directly. The only part that tripped me up was the last part, where he comes up and his attack pattern shift to him launching spikes out at you. That might trip up players expecting more conventional 3-stage structure to their bosses. But it's still a cool boss fight, so it goes here.
Tell me how the grass tastes, little man!
Coin Dozer Climber is a fine level with a strange enemy. There are Coin Dozers, a type of coin who will come running at you and will attempt to knock you off. They can be kinda annoying unless you're quick with your reflexes. They can't hurt you though, and they do double as platforms that you can stand on. I sorta wish there was more to them. I don't know, maybe if they get hit with fire, their shields become red hot for a second so you can't stand on them. Yeah, I'm just spitballing. Otherwise, this is an okay level.
I'd say we have to call that plausible.
I'd agree.
Murky Mill is a really neat level concept that's a bit undercut by one fact. See, the level has you turn to Ellie, and as we all know, elephants are terrified of mice. Look, Mythbusters proved it. So if Ellie gets into a light source with a mouse, she screams and runs away. So you need to use her trunk and ability to call over barrels to kill rats from a distance or in darkness. The problem here is that the game is intentionally giving you a handicap by forcing you to use Ellie. Normally, these levels turn you to animal buddies to make use of their strengths and mechanics for the level. Here, though, Ellie is intentionally given a weakness that you need to work around in order to beat the level. It would ironically be a much easier level if you were the Kongs. But it is an original level at the very least. There isn't another level like it, so I do gotta give it props for that. So it goes here. Although there is another level that sort of makes use of this trait for Ellie.
Well. If it isn't Crash Bandicoot.
Stampede Sprint is a fun level. It's basically a 2D Crash Bandicoot level. The idea of the level is that you need to play as Ellie, who can't stop running after she's scared by a bunch of mice. It's like a Tobogan level, but done slightly differently, and I think that's really cool. The problem I have with it though is that this level is really short, and all the bonus rooms are at the beginning. Well, okay, there's one you get if you make sure Perry survives, but that's easy enough. I would have liked the level to be a bit longer, maybe have an actual bonus barrel somewhere in there. Alternatively, you know what scares elephants more than mice? Bees. No, really. Bee swarms are known to chase elephants across savannas. I think they should have had the buzz swarm from Riverside Race here, and just give the level a timer. That I think would make more sense.
Yeah, I had a tough time when my oldest went out of the drop-off.
They just gotta grow up some. The drop-off?
Curl Reef is an underwater level with an interesting gimmick. Similar to Gusty Glade, the currents of the reef push you in different directions depending on the way the particles are flowing. Yeah, it's underwater Gusty Glade, which isn't too bad or anything, but I do ultimately find it more frustrating than Gusty Glade, and a lot less fun to look at, because it's a Pacifica level exclusive to the GBA. The GBA's underwater controls I feel are a bit less responsive too. But it's a cool idea, and it's an expansion on a mechanic from DKC2, so it gets to be here in the middle. So now that we're halfway through this list, I think it's only fair to stop and do a ranking for something else. See, this is the last country game to introduce new animal buddies. Meaning all the animal buddies in all the games so far are basically accounted for. Meaning what a better time to rank all the animal buddies than right now! Now, I've made my like and dislike for certain animal buddies quite apparent, but I'm gonna come at this list as objectively as possible. I'm not gonna rank an animal buddy lower or higher just because I hate or love them emotionally. Some thought will go into this, so with that out of the way, let's do this. So obviously DKC1 Squawks and Glimmer go in F tier. They suck. They blind you when you turn around and the levels aren't even dark enough to justify them. Even in the best case scenario, they're practically worthless. I guess Glimmer is worse than Squawks, but yeah, they're right next to each other. Perry, Clapper, and DKC2 Quawks all go in D tier. Perry is more of a side challenge than an actual helper. The most they do is hit some of the balloon birds in DKC3, and even then the objective with Perry is more to keep them alive so that they give you something when you cross the no animal sign. Clapper is just a guy who you jump on and he makes the water safe or frozen. Yeah, I'm not even sure he counts as an animal buddy. He's more like a context-sensitive switch almost. But he's listed here on the wiki, so whatever. DKC2 Quawks is obvious. He can't fly. He just descends slowly. Oh, but you can adjust the speed of his descent by hitting up and down, so you do in fact have some level of mid-air control. Look, even taking that into account, he's just a lazy design. He's purple Squawks. All I can think of when I see him is Squawks, who is a much better animal buddy. In the C tier, we have Ellie, unGuard Espresso, and DKC3 Quawks. A lot of E's here. DKC3 Quawks has the ability to fly properly now, and he can also pick up barrels. Which the Kongs can already do. Look, there's a reason you only transform into him in this game instead of hanging off his feet. Otherwise, it just highlights how useless he is compared to Squawks. unGuard is good for making water levels more bearable and giving you an attack underwater, but he's also very situational as far as animal buddies go. You only ever really use unGuard in water levels. Now, Espresso, objectively speaking, is worse than Quawks, because at least Quawks can fly, and Espresso can just glide a bit. But Espresso is only in DKC1 where flying wasn't even a mechanic yet, and he's also a unique design. He's not just a recolor of a pre-existing animal buddy. Plus he does run fast, so he can make speedrunning the level a bit more exciting. Ellie, meanwhile... poor Ellie. Like I said, she's kind of just a worse Rambi. Rambi can charge and ignores most enemies. He's a fucking powerhouse. Well, Ellie, she's scared of mice. And she can only jump on enemies, which again, the Kongs do. I assume she's in DKC3 over Rambi because Rambi can't swim, but that doesn't do much for her, sadly. The most impressive ability she has is her water gun, and even then that's an inconsistent power. Plus, it doesn't have a good range either. She's overall just not an animal buddy who stacks up well with her direct comparisons. Now I will say, unlike Quox, Ellie is doing her own thing. She's her own companion with her own design going on. She just has the unfortunate reality of being compared to the OG, who's a lot stronger. In B tier, we have Rattly, Rambi, and Winky. Rambi is the OG animal buddy for a reason. He is a goddamn powerhouse and a tank. He's also the most consistent animal buddy in the entire series, only really being absent from 3. Winky, meanwhile, I'm sorry, buddy. I love Winky's design and I like frogs, but a lot of people talked about how Rattly's more vertical design just works better with his mechanics. I personally never had a problem jumping on enemies as Winky, but if it's enough of an issue, they needed to change it. Still strange that neither one is in 3 though. But yeah, Rattly's at the top of B tier just because his extra mobility and super jump is just that little bit more useful than Rambi's charge. For a platformer, Rattly's just a bit of a better character than Rambi. A tier has only one entrant, and that's Squirtle. Squirtle's great. He's got the ability to make platforms, and he can fire projectiles that you can control. He's definitely one of the more useful animal buddies out there. Although he's a bit technical to understand for a kid. But once you do, he's a lot of fun. Finally in S tier, you guessed it, it's DKC 2 and 3 Squawks. I'm sorry, but being able to fly and shoot projectiles is just the best combination in a platformer. It just allows level design to open up a lot more and give you more tools to deal with enemies. While Squirtle may be more technically complicated than Squawks, in any given situation 9 out of 10 times you want Squawks. Which is why he gets to be here at the top. He hasn't seen as much use as Rambi, and the lesser versions of him may be a bit more prevalent, but he's also one of the more consistent animal buddies. What about him in returns, you ask? I don't know, that's not really like a mechanic or anything. D tier, whatever. Now, there is one thing about him I want to mention, however. I said in my last video that he spits out coconuts, but then somebody told me he actually spits out eggs. And all I can say to that is, what are you, stupid? A bird that spits eggs? What, are you gonna pair him up with one of these bear shop owners next? Can you imagine an egg-spitting bird and bear teaming up? Who would even make a game with such a stupid concept? Anyway, one last thing. Rambunctious goes into an A tier because he wasn't actually put into Donkey Kong Land, so we don't know how he would have played. And now back to the list.
Want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
Barrel Shield Bust Up is a pretty neat level with a very strange gimmick. You have these evil Kongs? No, they're called Minkies. So what are they related to Manky Kong? They're not even Kongs though. What are the nature of monkeys in this universe? Anyway, they're evil and they throw rocks at you and try to kill you. And you need to use these floating barrels to protect yourself. Now, normally this would be a pretty simple level idea and I'd have very little to say about it. Only problem is every time they throw a rock... Yeah, it's a bit grating, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I appreciate the audio cue somewhat, it helps to know when they're attacking. But they do it so much and it's all you freaking hear, so yeah, I'm putting this level here.
Chaos!
Chaos Carnage is a fight against an evil robot named Chaos, who, as we find out later, is actually Donkey Kong and Diddy trapped inside it and hooked up to its brain. Yeah, I feel like the name combined with the premise is more of Rare taking pot shots at Sonic. The fight itself is pretty basic. Just wait for his attacks to end and then jump on his head. The one thing that bothers me here though is the knives. These are the platforms you need to jump on in order to reach Chaos's head, and while it's a cool idea in theory, again it's hard to read when the knives are on the same level as you. Ambitious boss idea, however, so it gets to go here. Tracker Barrel Trek is the best of the Falls levels, which sadly just makes it okay. I like how it utilizes Ellie. You see, she has the ability to suck up water, and you're like, wait, where's the water in this level? Oh! I also really like how you can suck it up from both the front and the back, and there's a unique animation for both. They put a ton of effort into this. Outside of that, it has these cool tracking barrels, which are a simple but fun idea. I sort of wish later levels just combine all these different barrel types into one super barrel challenge, but well, that's just me wish casting.
The Demolition Duo has returned!
Demolition Drapipe is this game's first Tobogan level, and you may be asking, Manatee, why'd you rank this one so much lower than the cart levels in DKC 1 and 2? Well, the answer is simple. In DKC 1, they were a novel idea, and in DKC 2, they did a lot more with the concept, like gates and a ghost chasing you and a race. Here though, it's just a big tube you gotta skate through. It's a fine and thrilling level, but it's lacking the juice if you catch my drift. Also on top of toboggan levels.
Always remember, your bones will not break in a bobsled. No. They shatter.
Terrorite Toboggan is a lot like Demolition Drapipe, but it's in a snow-themed level so it ranks higher, because toboggans are a snow-themed racing vehicle. It's so weird that this game seems to forget that. Why is this the one toboggan level where it makes sense to use one? Well, it's still a pretty fun and frantic level.
Bomb?
Creeping Clasp is a fun stilt level. You basically hang out over the shallow water with Nibla waiting below. But the ropes themselves have these TNT enemies that will kamikaze into you. Is it okay if I say that? That's what they're doing. Anyway, the only thing I dislike about this level is that the class speed can feel oddly inconsistent. Their tight turning along with this game's somewhat wonky hit detection causes me to run into these guys a bit too much. I might just be terrible at this game, but that's what it felt like to me. Still a pretty fun level overall though.
So that's how you could afford that far-out mechanized jungle of yours.
Conveyor Rope Clash is kind of like Creeping Clasp, but a bit more involved and a bit more challenging. It's a level where you have ropes that propel you along. Between it and the buzzes, it makes for a pretty thrilling jungle level. Although there is one thing I should mention here for the sake of it. As you know, I played both the GBA and SNES version for this video. I think the GBA version of this game is fine. It looks worse than the SNES, but the new levels aren't like terribly designed or anything, so I think it's a nice little add-on if you just want more DKC 3. But one big difference between the SNES and the GBA is the soundtrack. DKC 3's soundtrack rather infamously wasn't done by David Wise, and was mostly done by Evelyn Novakovic. Wise, however, did all the compositions for the GBA version, and this makes some people prefer the GBA version blindly. Honestly, I think that's kinda silly. Wise is a great composer, but the GBA sound font is still not the same as the SNES sound font, and some of the tracks he did for the GBA version, yeah, I'll be frank, I just don't like as much. I think Evelyn did a damn good job, and if you didn't tell me that there was a different composer on the third game, I honestly wouldn't have noticed. But I will say, I do think I prefer the GBA's jungle theme, entirely because it's a remix of Jungle Hijinks. Which, I can't help it, I just love that song so much, so yeah, that's all I want to say. Play whichever one you want. Fish Food Frenzy is a pretty interesting level concept. You're basically doing an escort mission underwater for Nibla. If you get him to eat these clownfish, he's happy. If he eats one too many lurchin or goes too long without a meal though, be careful. I find the GBA version of this level to be a lot harder for some reason. Like, he goes after the lurchin a lot more in that one, and eats them much quicker than the SNES version. It's a solid concept for a level though. And no, I'm not counting Nibla as an animal buddy, that's why he's not in the prior ranking. He's a stage hazard you need to take care of, not animal buddy. And since we're here, let's do the most baffling bonus barrel for this game. Cause seriously, look at this. There's nothing here. No hazards, nothing to avoid, just grab the green bananas. It's like they forgot to put something here. Yeah, I don't know.
This is our flooded forest project.
Being primarily a water-focused world, I couldn't rank Pacifica's levels that highly, sadly. However, the best level in the GBA version of this game, bar none, is Sunken Spruce. The level has an interesting curve to where you need to go down, then you swim back up to get approximately where you started. So it's kind of an interesting warp back around style of level. I'd almost say you could remove the save barrel and just have the ability to create a permanent hole here, but I don't know how you'd program that, and it's not like this is a Souls game or anything, so yeah. It's still a pretty neat level though. An underwater hollowed out tree isn't something you get to explore much in platformers, so I need to give credit where it's due.
Knock knock!
Who's there? That door!
Doorstop Dash feels like the first level of the game that really shows DKC 3's promise. Good thing it's the second level of the game then. It takes place in a wood mill and has a simple gimmick. Pull down this lever and raise the door. You have a limited time before you can run through it. A simple idea, but it does help bring emphasis to DKC 3's strongest elements and themes. The artificial or unnatural world the Kongs are now going through. If more of the game leaned into the mad science theme, I think it would be a lot stronger. And while this isn't really a mad science theme per se, it does have that sort of mechanical carpentry aspect to it.
Thumpity thump thump thumpity thump thump.
Look at Frosty.
Bleaks House is a really interesting boss fight. Basically, it uses the side-to-side ball-throwing minigame from Swanky's Sideshow, but as a boss fight. It's a really neat and challenging boss that breaks up the pacing. Although, I do think it's a bit silly that's just an evil snowman. Like, what is it, some kind of robot in disguise as a snowman? The only other comment I have is that this boss fight can be a real difficulty spike if for some reason you didn't play Swanky's Carnival and you just ignored those sections entirely. Doubly so in the GBA where I don't think this minigame even exists, at least Swanky doesn't host it. So I don't know how GBA players were expected to learn this boss's mechanics. Real trial by ice, I guess. Heh, get it? Because he's a snowman? Never mind.
Graham, watch out! A poisonous snake!
One aspect of Bleaks House I didn't mention was his attacks, because I feel like they're more relevant to discuss here. Fireball Frenzy. The gimmick of this level is that you have these silly looking owls who shoot out balls of molten metal, I think? Anyway, the cool part is that they're in the background, but their shots come out at you at the foreground. It goes to show how Rare was really pushing the tech of the SNES to its limit. With that said, however, these attacks do have one flaw. Because this game is still ultimately 2D, it can be hard to guess when exactly it's safe to move through them. Like, is it safe to move here? Or here? Or here? Naturally, you can feel this out if you're paying attention. It's not like this attack is incomprehensible. But it's still a 2D game trying to deal with the technicalities of a 3D perspective, and as such, it's a bit hard to actually determine. Still, though, I have to give props for the ambition.
Wow, that is one whisper-quiet hamster wheel.
Squeals on Wheels is another cool mill level with a neat concept. You basically need to kill these mice in order to open up doors later in the level. It has a really cool end too, where you basically fall through a bunch of trapdoors right back down to the start of the level. I think this was the first time I really got clever level design in a way that made me appreciate it. The only thing that kind of bugs me is that none of the rats are particularly hard to find. The level likes to give you the opportunity to go back and find them if you reach the door without having killed them all, but honestly, if you can't find these guys, then I think you have more problems than beating this game ahead of you. They're not even really hidden. It's less like a scavenger hunt and more like a checklist. I wish there was like a bones barrel hidden behind a door and you had to, I don't know, kill a special white rat to get to it, or if the level just had more open design or something. You know, just to push the concept a bit more to its logical conclusion. But yeah, this is still pretty ambitious as far as levels go. Truly the Dark Souls of Donkey Kong Country. CRI Creepers is just a great level. We see the return of Clasps. Except this time, they hone in on you. It's a really exhilarating ascent up a mountain, avoiding exploding barrel enemies and navigating these ropes. The only thing that kind of bugs me is the coin of this level. See, how coins work is that you need to roll a barrel, bounce it off a wall, then get the coin to pay attention to you as the barrel strikes it from behind. This is normally either pretty brain dead or it allows for a neat puzzle. Here though, yeah, I don't know what the trick here is. I usually just throw the barrel as kitty, then hoof it and try to catch the coin at the last second. It feels more like I'm cheating the system than actually outsmarting it, if that makes any sense. Oh well, it's still a fine level overall.
I'm not mad. I'm angry. I am an angry scientist.
I'm putting both Castle Chaos and the Nautilus back to back for this section because ultimately they feel like two phases of the same boss. Castle Chaos is where you square off with Baron K. Rulenstein, and Nautilus is where you deal with him in his submarine. These two might honestly be the most fun a K. Rool fight has been. There's a ton more variety here than with his DKC 1 or 2 fights, in my honest opinion. Like before, you really just had to pay attention to his attack patterns. Here, meanwhile, he's changing the environment, moving platforms and creating hazards and trying to catch you. It feels more like an actual platforming boss than any of the others, and I think that counts for something. If I had to pick which fight I prefer, I guess I prefer Castle Chaos a bit more. Simply because it has an ending. You beat K. Rool, and then Donkey and Diddy are freed, and then we go beat up Cranky. Meanwhile, in Nautilus, we drag K. Rool out of his submarine. We go fight him. We throw the barrels down his head, and he finally goes falling onto his steering wheel, huh? What? Did I press a button and skip a cutscene? What happened? Yeah, this is the big problem with DKC3's ending. It has too many of them, to be frank. But that's not really an issue with the fights themselves, so they still get to be here.
That kind of thing might work on Coach X or Coach Y, but you're dealing with Coach Dang Z. Now get up that rope!
Calling Fused Cliffs is a level with a cool idea. There's a central rope you need to climb up, but uh-oh. Looks like you're running out of it. So you need to climb up. The level itself is also a lot of fun, although its verticalness can kind of be to its detriment. It's hard to predict where enemies will come from and how to react accordingly, so you're incentivized to just keep in the middle. But that flame is creeping ever closer, so it does create a pretty fun tug of war, which I think gives it the number 10 spot.
10, 9, 9, 9, 9.
Rocket Rush is a bizarre level. There's really nothing else like it in the entire series. You jump into this rocket, and there's two parts to the level. One where you descend to try to collect fuel canisters on the way down, and another where you go blasting off to try and collect fuel canisters on the way up. Strangely, I found the opposite halves of each level to be equally hard in both the SNES and GBA versions of the game. In the SNES version, the first half was easy. Your barrel is invincible and you just plow through the enemies. But control is a lot looser and more difficult, so ascending upward had me colliding with the ceiling a lot more, which had me run out of fuel and kill me. Meanwhile, in the GBA version, you aren't invincible as you descend, and thus you need to try and avoid the buzzes. But the ascending controls are a lot more responsive, so I pretty much made it to the top on my first try. It's really neat how the same level can feel radically different in the two versions, which I think is worth commemorating.
No springs!
Puddle Panic is a cave level where the gimmick is you get to ride on every animal buddy in the game. All the good animal buddies. This makes the level relatively easy while still feeling varied. It's nice to have one little victory lap with all your animal buddies. There is one other problem I have though, and that's this game's lack of a full animal buddy roster. It brings Squirtle and Squawks back from DKC2 and replaces Rambi with Ellie, but no Rattly or Winky equivalent. Oh, and I guess Engard is there too, but nobody cares, I'm sorry. Still though, it's a fun level with a lot of variety, so it gets to be here at number 8. Languin Lunge is a fun level with a simple premise. You have a bunch of penguins that go sliding off cliffs. Oh, I get it, they're like lemming penguins. That's cute. Anyway, jumping at them as they go sliding at you is a lot of fun. I enjoy any level in which you can bounce on multiple enemies a bunch of times. My only real complaint is, I wish they showed up in more snow levels. But I suppose less is more in this case. It's just a fun level with a silly gimmick, so it gets to be number 7. Poison Pipeline is fascinating to me. It's a water level in which you swim through a purple chemical that inverts your controls. Left is right and right is left now. Normally, I would hate this concept, but honestly, it actually fixes one of my big complaints with water levels, because now I'm actually more engaged than I was before. I actually had to think about my character's maneuverability in a way I didn't have to. It impedes you in a sense, but not in a way that actually slows down or makes you play worse. It just messes with your controls. So you have to adjust yourself to play better. That's actually a really smart idea. The level itself would be absolutely boring and nothing without it, so the fact this one gimmick can salvage it this much, I think it deserves its place here. Plus, I mean, if you're that frustrated by this level, you can just change your inputs on the emulator. I mean... Ripsaw Rage is a really cool level with a neat gimmick. Again, it's a vertical-oriented level with an obstacle chasing you. Only here it's a giant freaking saw going through this tree. Where did it come from? Is it part of some giant machine or something? It's really cool and it gives the level a real sense of dread. However, I do have one complaint. Not with this version, no, the GBA version. See, in this version, the second bonus barrel is kinda broken. The green bananas appear way too close to the bottom, and it makes them way more difficult to catch or even see. I basically need to run around the bottom of the saw for this bonus barrel, and pray that I run into one. It makes the bonus game feel like RNG, which isn't good game design. Other than that, it's a great level. Swoopy Salvo is sort of like the superior version of Languin Lunge. You have these woodpeckers who come flying in and either provide platforms or be hazards you're meant to avoid. It's one of the last levels of Kramatoa, and it's one of the harder ones too. But it's a lot of fun to get through. The Squawks bonus room in particular can be pretty challenging. But once you get the pattern of them down, it gets much more manageable. It's just a great forest level with a ton of bird-on-bird violence. Which is fine because it happens all the time in nature. Crackshot Croc is a really cool level. You turn to Squirtle for most of it, and your objective is to avoid this target reticle that fires balls of molten ore at you. But that's not the crazy part. The crazy part is, this guy is a canon enemy. His name is Croc, and we never see him. He's always just outside our field of view. He's like that one sniper from Trigun, but a Kremling, I guess? Or maybe he's not even a Kremling, he just uses the alias Croc to throw people off. Maybe he's actually a Manky Kong, who knows? There's even a bonus barrel where you get to use his gun against enemies. I sorta wish there was a boss fight that used this mechanic. It's nuts they went out of their way to program this in and use it only once. God damn, this level is cool. Honestly, the only thing holding it back for me is playing as Squitter. Don't get me wrong, I like Squitter, but I think a normal level with the Kongs in this mechanic would have been preferable. Though maybe the logic is Squidward's platform mechanics makes his movement slower, so it makes Croc a bit more challenging. I don't know. Being a game set around a mad scientist theme, it only makes sense for Lightning to play a role in Baron K. Rulenstein's castle, and Lightning Lookout is a prime example of cool theming done right. This is a forest level where you need to try and avoid lightning. You see where it'll strike first, then you need to either stop or get it out of the way. You can also use the lightning to kill enemies above you, but if you think getting into the water will save you, well, remember Pokemon rules. It's just a great level with a ton of cool atmosphere and a neat gimmick. Really strong for the final world. For my last two number 1 picks, I went with levels that had a cool gimmick or theme that spoke to me in some way about the game. DKC 1 I picked Slipside Ride because the Ice Cave was a wholly unique theme, and I think it really showcased the pristine natural beauty of DKC 1. DKC 2 I picked Gusty Glade because I think it showcased the game's more somber tone and challenging level design. When I think of DKC 3, however, I think of my home country of Canada. The Northern Hemisphere is obviously meant to be based on Canadian wilderness in a lot of ways, and nothing reminds me of my country more than driving through the mountains to and from British Columbia. And a lot of the cliff levels have really excellent vibes to me because of that. And of all the cliff top levels, Ropey Rumpus is the best one in my opinion. It's just a joy to play through. No clasp to hurry you along, no burning rope to divide your attention, just a beautiful pristine mountaintop setting with ropes to climb on. Oh, and the mutant cyborg bees, of course. And I forget how weird these games are sometimes. So yeah, Ropey Rumpus is my number 1. I know some people might object to the parry bonus level, but the level itself is actually pretty short if you know what you're doing. So replaying it isn't even that big of an issue. Plus, I just love this level theme and that guitar riff. All of this and more is why I'm putting it right at the top. So that was Donkey Kong Country 3. And yeah, I'll still say that this is my second favorite of the SNES trilogy. Heck, I might even call it my favorite on a good day. But I do think I ultimately prefer 2's art design and tone more than this one. Gameplay goes a long way, obviously, and that's probably DKC 3's saving grace. That doesn't make the game's goofier tone bad, though. I know some people who really like it. It's just something I can understand not everyone gelling with. It's still a really fun game, and I highly recommend trying it out. If you like it, then try the GBA version for the few extra levels, too. Now, the only question is, where do we go from here? See, at first I thought I was going to jump straight into Donkey Kong Country Returns. With the definitive version coming out soon for the Switch, it'd be the ideal time to test it. But then I got thinking. It's not like Donkey Kong games necessarily stop between this game and DKC Returns. And I also got to thinking, there were other Donkey Kong games released around this time. Yep, strap in everybody, we're going portable for the next video. We'll be looking at Donkey Kong on the Game Boy. Stay tuned.